Thanks, Martin. Kia ora koutou. Thanks for coming along and listening to us. We're like the last of the conference, apart from the plenary, so it feels kind of, we're all exhausted and had a load of inspirational things this week, so thank you for coming along to join us for our talk. The idea of this talk is to take flood model predictions, which are produced using a standard hydraulic modeling process for flood assessment, and then represent them visually within virtual reality in order to improve community understanding of their flood risks. So we'll take you through that process where we generate the environments using open geospatial data and methods, and then visualizing them within the virtual reality system. So as we probably all are aware, flood risks are very high. We have 1.81 billion people globally are affected, and we have a combination of both urban development and climate change affecting flood risks, and they will continue to do so in the future. So we expect flood risks to increase. So communication of that risk is really essential in order for people to be able to mitigate against them and prepare better for their flooding. And yet the 2D maps that are produced as part of flood risk assessments, for some people, geospatial people, everyone in this room I expect, you're able to interpret them really easily and they are really appealing. But for many people, they do not engage well with that sort of media 2D maps, and having something much more realistic could be much more useful to help them improve their understanding. So that's the aim of this project, the Virtually Flooded project. We're developing those methods to realistically represent modeled flood risks within communities. And we have a small project team. The Xander there on the left-hand side of the picture is the guy who is really doing the Unreal Engine developments and of the environments. Luke, our software engineer here, has done a lot of the model ingestion into Unreal and has written code for that. And I have just had fun using the tech and visualizing things. So flood risk assessment 101, we need to create hydraulic models. We use LiDAR data. In New Zealand, we're really fortunate to have open LiDAR data across most of the country, thanks to LINS and our LiDAR flight program. And we generate scenarios based on rain, tide, river flow, and so on. And we use that data within a hydraulic model. It doesn't really matter what hydraulic model it is. But those inputs are fed into the hydraulic model, and then we make predictions of where the water flows over time. And where it's blue, obviously, is where the water is. And as we see the rainstorm occur, you start to see the rainfall build up and up and up. Then what we do is we take those outputs and we look, say, where did the water get to? And we look at an assessment of, what buildings, what roads were flooded, and to look at an impact assessment. And if you came to our talk on Wednesday, we've created a flood resilience digital twin to do this in an automated pipeline. But we're still producing maps that are 2D or 3D, but still within the browser, and that you still need to interpret and engage. Our hope, and we're not quite there yet, but our hope is to have the virtual reality as one of the endpoints in the visualization process from the digital twin. So you'll be able to put the VR headset on and then interact with the digital twin and have the data fed back in. So what we're presenting today is some of the work that we've done towards doing that. And so that brings us to the Virtually Flooded project, which is what this talk is about. So as I said, we're looking to model realistic flood scenarios in that 3D virtual environment, and we're using Unreal Engine to do that. We use the flood model output from that. We use it from the flood resilience digital twin, but it could be any hydraulic model output where you have the depths and flows over time. We create a virtual world from open data, so we create a realistic representation of a community from things like building polygons and road networks. And we use code that Luke has developed to ingest the flood model output into Unreal Engine and then have that represented in real time within the software. So, this is where it gets interesting. This is the bit that Luke's going to take over and our tag team approach here and talk through how we go about doing this. So as I said, we take that outputs from the flood model into Unreal Engine, and our aim is to develop an automated process so that we can generate virtual environments and the flood visualizations for anywhere where we have those model outputs, really on demand. Luke.
Yeah. So this map shows a larger scale flood model output, but we're working on a smaller scale, 1 kilometre square roughly. That's due to technical limitations in Unreal Engine, just the amount of data that we can realistically, graphically show while still keeping a good frame rate in the VR headset. So our data comes from elevation generated from LiDAR, OpenStreetMap data generates buildings, roads, green spaces, and I'll show some views of that soon. And we also are working towards a pipeline to add trees in the correct densities and locations into our visualizations. And then, of course, the flow comes directly from model outputs, and we use a plugin for Unreal Engine called Fluid Flux 3.0. 3.0 was just released this year. It's an amazingly performant shallow water equations implementation. Unfortunately, it's proprietary, but we're able to generate model outputs for other kind of data as well. So if another tool comes along that implements shallow water equations but is open source, we'd be able to use that. Here's a view of an example of an environment that we've generated. Everything here is generated automatically. That's kind of a side effect of the project we've been working on. It helps us generate new areas quickly. So you can see the path of the river, the LiDAR has generated the terrain, we've got all of the buildings in the correct locations, and roads, railways, they're all in the correct locations, and trees are approximate. So we're still working on this automation pipeline, but it's kind of a side effect of the project. Next. So taking this area of interest, we define a few points. I'll go into detail about those soon, but we take those points and we can form a depth over time plot for the water. So you can see in some areas close to the river, for example, it reacts quite quickly, and then further into the townships, maybe the flooding only begins to happen after 20 hours in this model. And we can use those to add water sources into our fluid flux engine. So the process starts by a manual process of going into software like QGIS and defining some key points. That's something that we'd like to automate, but it's a difficult process to decide exactly where those points are. So if anyone's got thoughts on that, we'd love to have a chat later. But we extract the depth over time for each point. We extract the terrain elevation because that's very important for the internal flood modeling and fluid flux. And then we have to convert those points into Unreal Cartesian coordinates, which is a zero origin in the middle of the area of interest with units in centimeters instead of meters. So, and then we save all of those vectors to disk because in the next stage, we're not able to use free and open source software as easily. We have to, so we've added the ability to use depth over time plots within fluid flux. That's in child dependency that we've added to fluid flux open source. And then we use a vanilla Python script to add things into Unreal. We can't use GeoPandas or X-Ray or those kind of libraries because it's quite difficult to add those to the Unreal Engine scripting engine while still releasing the software easy to use for others. And you can see an example of a water source here. It kind of looks like a pipe has burst and it's doing something crazy, but that's in Unreal. Okay. So here's a video of us running this Python script within Unreal Engine. So you execute the Python script, select it, and runs through a for loop about 30 times for 30 different sources. And then it adds those sources at the same points that we showed in the graphic earlier. And then we can begin a flood simulation running in Unreal Engine. And you can see the water flowing out over the landscape. And then from there, you can save the state and make it more efficient, or have, say, a beginning state for your visualization, your video outputs, or your virtual reality game, however you'd like it. So eventually, this would fill up the scene. It takes a few minutes to stabilize, and then you'll see some of the outputs that Matt's going to show. Oh, and this is our GitHub page. If you're using Unreal Engine, feel free to have a go at this. Come to me for any feedback. It's early stages of release, so yeah, please let us know.
2 stars now.
Oh, yeah, we're more than 1 star, we're 2 stars. Matt's the other one.
Let's forget about the sound. Even more so than the headsets, because of that accessibility of them. And so we can see the generation of the flood over time. You can see areas getting flooded. When it started, you saw the areas without being flooded. And the sound effects are kind of interesting, but they help. They do help to. And I noticed I didn't edit the sound in this video either, so that's something I need to sort out. But you can sort of see all the different typologies of the buildings are as they are in this location, so commercial versus houses and so on. And you can sort of see the stop banks or the levees, the railways and so on, and where it gets flooded. So this is one of the principal outputs that we've generated. We've also produced a 360 wraparound video, and in the University of Canterbury we have a 360 projection room, so we've used that for teaching. So here you see a group of students sitting down and we're talking about flood risk in the area, and they sort of do a flyover. We've put that 360 video, I mean in this it's a 360 wraparound without the sky and ground for obvious reasons, but you can actually produce a full dome 360 video, and that's on that YouTube link there. We've also got that loaded into this headset. If anybody wants to try that out after this, they're very welcome to. That's not full VR. I'll show you the VR in a second, but there's some compromises that you need to make when doing full VR versus video. So here you see lots of things in really high definition, because we can generate the video over several hours. Whereas when we are doing things in full VR, we have to generate everything in real time. And so it becomes a balancing act of how much detail you show versus your compute. And so we had this at a conference, a booth at a conference a few weeks ago, and people tried this out. And what we did was we started off in a dry scene, and people got the idea of how to use the equipment. So you're seeing somebody, actually it's Luke, playing around with the VR and jumping between the different locations. And we stick people mostly within dry areas, i.e. rooftops. And then they get to experience the VR and get used to it and used to the controls and so on. And then we turn on the flood risk in a second. If you knew this location, you'd be able to navigate your way around the town. And now obviously it's flooding, so the water level is at the peak of the flood. That has been predicted by the hydraulic model, which has then been ingested on the engine, which is then used in the VR. And you can start to see things like water levels getting up against buildings and cars being inundated and so on. Okay. And one of the things that we've explored a little bit is how much do you allow people to walk through the water in the VR, because you really shouldn't walk into floodwaters. So that's something that we've been a little bit careful of. And there's some other developments that we'd like to do within this, particularly things like debris flow and allowing objects to flow in the water. We know we can do that, is adding them in an appropriate way. So, just to summarize, the purpose of this project is really to help with that public understanding of flood risks, and in particular overcome the limitations of 2D maps that get presented on council websites and so on. We know that people are still taking decisions to move and live in high flood risk areas, and we're still building in those areas. So clearly the message isn't getting through completely. And our hope is that this sort of visualization work will help get that message across. So we're using completely open data to create those virtual environments, and open model results as well. So they're actual environments using actual model results being represented within Unreal Engine. Luke's developed the open source code for injecting the model results into Unreal Engine, and we've explored multiple outputs, curated videos, which give us sort of an ability to control things a bit more and have higher quality, 360 videos, which are really cool for wearing a headset, and you can try it out, as well as the virtual reality. The other thing we haven't done yet is use things like a game engine, so to have like a 2D display on a screen and then allow people to explore with, just on like in a computer game. And that's it. Please ask any questions and come and try out the 360 video if you like.
We have questions. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, we'll start from here and we'll work our way through the Z. You take space filling curve through the roof.
Might take it near the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. This is fantastic, really, really powerful stuff. I'm interested in the sort of, what's the main use case at the moment? Is it cost prohibitive for a local council to take this out like now into a workshop and show people, or?
I think it's cost prohibitive for a council to develop this sort of thing from scratch, for sure. But we have had conversations with 2 councils so far in New Zealand who are interested in using this sort of tech. And I think because we've developed a bit of a pipeline to develop the environment and the automation, that cost comes down, and we've had research funding to enable us to do that. So I think it is feasible. We're not quite there yet with full automation, so it still requires a bit more intervention than I would like. But particularly for things like climate scenarios, there's a national flood model that's been released with climate scenarios that look really bad, because they are pretty bad. And how do we communicate that? I think there is a lot of interest in using this sort of thing for that, and it can be done internationally as well. Any other thoughts?
just a thought on that. The GitHub repository that we've got online doesn't have all of the work towards automated environments yet. So if that's something that's of interest to people, we can potentially look at releasing that open source as well.
It's not quite ready yet, but yes.
Thanks, guys. You talked about the issue of having to convert the coordinates into the Unreal local coordinate system. Yep. I wondered whether you were familiar with Cesium for Unreal, that allows you to use WGS84, and whether there was an intentional reason for not picking that.
Yeah, so this project started with Cesium for Unreal, and we eventually moved away from it. It had some troubles with the flood model routing, and also at the time we weren't aware of the Gaia 3D's 3D tiling system, Mega 3D tiler, and we really needed full control over what our environment looked like, with the ability to potentially make some small-scale landscape or building changes. So now that we are aware of and see the maturity of Mega 3D tiler, that's potentially a way we could explore creating environments quicker.
I just have one small thought on that as well. The Cesium 3D, we use it in other projects, and it's awesome. But if you stand in a VR headset next to a building, the level of detail just isn't there in terms of what would look realistic to somebody standing next to a building. So we have to generate a building using procedural modeling for that building to look realistic. I think maybe generating very high detail 3D tiles would be another good way to go.
Yeah, that's a discussion I'd like to have as well, because we've been facing the same problem.
I guess you kind of touched on this there. What level of detail is your original building data, and then what do you do to get it? Like, they all have, names of the different businesses and stuff. Is that all procedurally generated?
Yeah, so we use a combination of OpenStreetMap and Lin's building polygon and building footprints. Essentially, we take into account an estimation of the building height and also and density, but also adding the buildings and the correct centroid is our main part here. The land use zone, so commercial, residential, those kind of things also come into play, but the buildings aren't a one-to-one representation of the buildings that you see. Partly to alleviate some of the kind of almost like a trauma response people might see if they see their own building, their own house flooded. We don't really want to make it quite that level of personal, but yeah, we're exploring, trying to find that balance.
Hey guys, that was fantastic. I'm really interested in this. One thing that you mentioned at the end there, it's mostly for public use and understanding of risk. So it's not specifically an accurate flood model in the way of like hydrology. Have you considered putting your points where you start the flow from in hydrologically accurate locations, and or using actual flood modeling for the outcomes? Or have you truthed it against any historic modeling or outcomes of historic floods?
It's using hydraulic modeling as the input source. So those have been produced, and it can be any. The models you're seeing here are from NERA models that have been released recently. We've also do our own modeling, but it can be any model at all. So the councils we've spoken to are interested in using their own models within this. And then we're selecting manually the locations of where to put those sources, because automating that step requires a bit more thinking. How are we going to do that? Because of those sorts of issues, we need to be in hydraulically appropriate locations, right? Yeah. So we're using our judgment for that at the moment. And those add water or remove it. So the mass balance within that and the water slope is going to be matching the model that goes in. But then the routing around the buildings, in this hydraulic model that goes in here, it was done at 5 meter resolution, but then in the Unreal Engine, it's 0.5 meter resolution. So we're adding detail in there at the kind of subgrid level, if you like.
Right, so that initial model that you're running the points from is a hydrological model with the depth over time of water from a model.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's,
Yeah.
yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Hi, I've just got a question about velocity. You touched on not letting people kind of walk into the floodwaters at all, but obviously when a real flood does come through, a lot of people, drive through or walk through when they probably shouldn't. Can you incorporate velocity into your headset somehow to almost allow people to walk through and see how far they go? And I guess that's kind of touching on the game side of things. So, and maybe you don't want to get into that and that trauma response that you spoke about, but I think it could be really interesting.
It's a really good point, and actually this location we've chosen and the type of the event that's being modelled. So you've got a really high tide happening simultaneously to the flood peak in a very flat area, and so that's actually not much flow happening in this event, but there is flow within the fluid flux 3. Within Unreal Engine there is flow, which you can see at the start of the event and so on. And we know that we can model the physics of floating cars and things like that. Modeling a person floating might be more tricky for various reasons, but certainly you can have a representation of the movement of the water more clearly. And I think one of the things that has really come across is that just as it is within a real flood event, it becomes very hard to navigate your way around an area because you lose your bearings and you can't see where you're putting your feet. We've deliberately made the water dirty. The default in fluid flux is to have crystal clear water, which looks lovely, but it's not realistic. And so we're trying to kind of give that impression of what it actually is during the flood event. But I think trying other locations, we'll start to see those sorts of effects more clearly.
And also on that note, we're exploring, like Matt said, the kind of traditional flat screen gaming as a way that maybe you could have a third-person view or a character moving around in a watercraft, a small boat or something like that, that would be able to react to the flows much easier. You probably don't want to have a character running through the water and getting swept away, but trying to find, that balance.
Any question there? It's like a labyrinth here. Get dizzy.
Yeah, it was just more on the last point, and I was thinking, how would you actually try to put that across to the public, the speed or danger of the water? And probably the best way is imagining them in a boat and being unable to navigate it, and that probably puts it across. Probably one of the better ways, because my other question was sort of already answered was, had you considered using street level photography to really put, and basically building meshes, a style like mapillary or drone overflies to make it really feel realistic, but there is that trauma response?
No, it's a great question. A couple of thoughts there. Obviously, Street View is non-open data and make it. I'm not sure how we would do that using those data actually. But also it would raise those sorts of problems about it being a bit too real, seeing your own house flooded. But people have asked things like augmented reality, and that is something I think would be worth exploring. Possibly not to this level of realism in terms of the flow, but having the water level indicated as you stand and hold your phone up in a location, where does the water get to for different scenarios would be quite a good thing to do. And the other thing in terms of the boat suggestion, we've thought of that after the conference where we had this, we had a bit of a debrief thinking, how can we actually have people navigate in a way that doesn't and have them walk through the water? And so a boat that they could control is the idea. It's not that easy to do, but I think we can do it. And moving slowly rather than fast, because there's issues to do with motion sickness and things in VR as well. So thanks, good thoughts. Any thoughts?
Any more questions? One. There? Oh, well, we should go.
Just wondering if you've tested this in a coastal environment at all, if you've brought storm surge or like multi-hazard into it, or just solely fluvial and pluvial.
This has got coastal as well.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit
Okay.
inland, so you don't see the sea.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, in fact, there's no storm surge, but there's a very high tide with several rivers and pluvial. But it would be quite straightforward to add some
Yeah.
storm surge to that as
Add
well.
more in. Cool.
Yeah.
No, thank you, really cool.
That's true. We are working in another site, but we can't reveal that location like we just did.
All right.
And if anybody would like to try the VR headset quickly, you're
Yeah.
very welcome to.
Oh, we have a break now, so we can play with that. All right, thank you very much.